The Ripple of Dreams. Jaden Carter grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, a city rich with the echoes of history. The streets, lined with monuments and plaques, bore silent testimony to the struggles of the civil rights movement. But for Jaden, the most powerful reminders of that past weren't the statues or signs. They were the stories his grandmother, Miss Ruby, shared with him at home. She had lived through the movement, marched alongside her community, and never failed to remind Jaden of the importance of those who came before him. Miss Ruby often spoke about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the man she referred to as the dreamer who showed us the way. Her admiration for him was palpable, and when she spoke of him, her eyes would shine with a mixture of pride and reverence. Dr. King wasn't just a man of words, Jaden, she'd tell him. He gave us hope when things seemed hopeless. He showed us that love can be stronger than hate. Jaden grew up hearing these stories, but as a child, he didn't fully grasp their significance. Dr. King was a hero to him, but it wasn't until he reached high school that the weight of his grandmother's words began to sink in. At school, Jaden faced challenges that felt eerily familiar to the stories he'd heard about the past. He was one of the few black students in his advanced classes, and though he excelled academically, he often felt the sting of being underestimated by his teachers and peers. There were times when Jaden wondered if anything had really changed. Though the segregation of his grandmother's era had ended, he still felt its shadows. Comments from classmates, even well-meaning ones, made him feel out of place. "You're not like the others," someone would say, as if being black and smart were an anomaly. It wore on him, and there were days when Jaden felt like giving up. But then he'd remember his grandmother's stories, particularly her words about Dr. King. He didn't give up when it got hard, baby. He knew he wasn't fighting just for himself. He was fighting for all of us. One evening, after a particularly tough day at school, Jaden found himself standing in front of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Dr. King had once preached. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the church. Jaden stood there, thinking about all that Dr. King had accomplished in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. He thought about the threats Dr. King had faced, the violence, the hatred. And yet, Dr. King had remained steadfast in his belief in love, nonviolence, and justice. Standing there, Jaden realized that Dr. King's legacy wasn't just something of the past. It was something that lived on in each person who chose to continue the fight for justice. If Dr. King could keep going, Jaden whispered to himself, then so can I. That moment changed everything. Jaden decided that he would follow in the footsteps of his role model, not by becoming a famous leader, but by making a difference where he could. He joined his school's student government and began advocating for discussions on race, diversity, and inequality. He organized events where students from all backgrounds could share their experiences and talk about the challenges they faced. Jaden knew that real change began with conversation, with people learning to listen to and understand one another. As Jaden's leadership grew, so did his ambitions. By his senior year, he was working with teachers and administrators to develop programs that addressed the racial disparities within the school. But the world outside the school walls continued to challenge him. One day, news broke of a violent incident involving police officers and a young black man in a neighboring town. The community was outraged, and protests began to spread. Jaden knew he had to act. Inspired by Dr. King's principles of nonviolence, Jaden decided to organize a peaceful protest in Montgomery. He worked tirelessly to coordinate with local officials, ensuring that the protest would be both peaceful and powerful. He knew this was his chance to make a real impact, to follow Dr. King's example in his own way. On the day of the protest, Jaden stood at the front of a large crowd, holding a megaphone in his hands. He looked out over the faces of his classmates, teachers, and neighbors, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. This was his moment. Taking a deep breath, Jaden began to speak. "We're here today because we believe in what Dr. King taught us, that love and unity are stronger than hate. He dreamed of a world where we are judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. It's our responsibility to keep that dream alive." The crowd cheered, and for the first time, Jaden felt the power of his voice. He knew this protest wouldn't change everything, but it was a step. It was the start of something bigger, ripple in the water that could spread outward and make a difference. The protest drew media attention, and Jaden was praised for his leadership and composure. His school administration, once hesitant about supporting the protest, began to work with Jaden on expanding the inclusivity programs he had initiated. It wasn't a revolution, but it was progress. That night, when Jaden returned home, Miss Ruby was waiting for him on the porch. She hugged him tightly, her eyes glistening with pride. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "You did what Dr. King would have done." Jaden smiled. "I'm just trying to keep the dream alive, Grandma." Years later, Jaden went on to college, where he studied political science and civil rights law. He became a lawyer, fighting for justice in courtrooms and communities across the country. Every case he took, every speech he gave, he carried Dr. King's legacy with him. He knew that the dream wasn't something to be looked at from afar. It was something to live, to fight for every day. And as long as people like Jaden continued that fight, the dream would never die.